Even though this decade is only halfway through, enough mysteries have emerged over the last 5 years to dedicate an entire video to them. These recent, strange, and unsettling cases demonstrate that enigmas, incredible stories, and unexplained events do not belong solely to the past. And who knows, surely by 2030 we will be making a second part of this video with new, equally disturbing events. So, get comfortable and turn off the lights, because these are 7 unsolved mysteries of the 2020s. How is it going? Good morning, afternoon, or evening. And here we begin, the enigma of the monoliths. In November 2020, amidst the pandemic and global chaos, a group of biologists from Utah was flying over a remote area of the desert with the task of counting bighorn sheep when, amidst the reddish and solitary landscape, they observed something that didn't fit, a metallic column nearly 3 meters high, perfectly embedded in the middle of a red rock canyon. Its shiny surface reflected the sunlight, contrasting with the aridity of the environment. There were no nearby roads or signs that anyone had transported it there. It seemed as if it had been there for centuries. The discovery spread quickly, attracting the attention of international media. Within hours, some internet users located the exact site and discovered through Google Earth images that the structure had appeared at some point between 2016 and 2020. The monolith, as we began to call it, was reminiscent of the famous film 2001, A Space Odyssey, which sparked a wave of theories and speculations. Some interpreted this as a work of art hidden for years, while others pointed to it as a vestige of something more disturbing. The mystery, far from dissipating, only deepened, and so, dozens of curious people began to travel to the place, leaving behind trash and damage to the terrain. So only a couple of days later, the monolith disappeared. Soon, a group of slackliners claimed responsibility for its removal, arguing that they wanted to prevent the crowds from damaging the ecosystem, thus closing the possibility of the object being studied in depth. In this way, the enigma of the Utah monolith seemed to remain inconclusive. However, within a few days, new structures began to appear in different parts of the world. The same day the Utah monolith was removed, another was found in Romania, on a hill near an archaeological site. This one had engravings on the surface and more rudimentary craftsmanship, but the similarity was undeniable. It also disappeared without a trace, shortly after. Days later, a third one emerged in California, which was violently torn down by a group of religious extremists who considered it a pagan symbol. Later, another appeared in Las Vegas, in the middle of Fremont Street, surrounded by passers-by and tourists. Reports of similar structures surfaced in Joshua Tree, on the coast of Spain, in Turkey, in India, and in dozens of other countries. By this point, the monolith fever had become a global phenomenon. In a few weeks, more than 200 were counted across the planet. Some were confirmed as local works of art or pranks planned to attract attention. In Canada, a businessman used them to promote his business. In Morocco, one was part of a technology campaign. In the United States, several appeared in front of stores or even in parks accompanied by satirical messages. However, not all had an explanation. In countries like Finland, monoliths were discovered in fields covered in snow with no footprints around them. In Wales, one appeared in a muddy ravine with no traces of anyone having transported it. In places as remote as Idaho or the Democratic Republic of the Congo, access even required helicopters, and yet the structures were there solid, shiny, and anonymous. It didn't take long for theories about their origin to multiply. An art collective called The Most Famous Artist hinted at being responsible for some, even going so far as to sell monoliths online for exorbitant sums. However, they never confirmed all the appearances. The possibility that they were a tribute to the minimalist sculptor John McCracken was also mentioned. Although the finish of the pieces did not match his style, others associated them with movie sets or science fiction series filmed in Utah. Many of these explanations were plausible in isolated cases but insufficient to account for the entire phenomenon. After the initial frenzy, the topic lost media momentum, but the mystery had not ended. In March 2024, a runner found a steel monolith on a hill in Wales. Despite the muddy terrain, there were no tracks of vehicles or footprints in the surroundings. 3 months later, in June, a rescue team in the Nevada desert found another, this time near Goldfield. The structure was nearly 2 meters tall and was reinforced with steel bars and concrete. The Las Vegas police removed it a few days later for safety reasons, but images circulated worldwide and revived the debate. More than 4 years after the first discovery, the enigma remains open. The record of monoliths exceeds 240 documented cases, with a mosaic of explanations ranging from experimental art to simple imitation. However, the existence of structures in inaccessible places and the absence of traces at some sites keeps alive the feeling that not everything has been solved. The most disturbing pattern is that many appear in contexts of global uncertainty, health crises, political conflicts, or simply moments when society seems to be looking for a symbolic escape. The monoliths do not transmit a clear message, nor do they reveal their function. They simply are there, waiting to be discovered, only to subsequently disappear without a trace. And it is precisely that ambiguity that makes them unsettling. They are objects that do not fit into the landscape or the discourse, which force us to look twice and to admit, even if just for an instant, that not everything can be explained with ease. And the most disturbing thing is that the cycle seems not to have ended, for at any moment, in any corner of the world, someone could stumble upon a new shiny column standing on the ground. The disappearance of Sarm Heslop. Sarm Heslop was a 41-year-old British flight attendant who decided to turn her life around, leaving England to join her boyfriend, Ryan Bain, in the Virgin Islands in the Caribbean Sea. A decision that would lead her, unknowingly, to be the protagonist of one of the strangest and most controversial disappearances of recent years. Bain was an American who operated a luxury yacht, where they both spent their time offering private trips to tourists, she as a chef and he as the captain. The couple had met in 2020 through the Tinder application and soon began a relationship. After reuniting in the Caribbean, they settled on the Siren Song, a 47-foot catamaran anchored in Cruz Bay, St. John. On the night of the 7th of March 2021, they went out for dinner at a restaurant on the island. According to witnesses, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, that would be the last time anyone, except for Bain, would see the woman alive. Around 10:00 p.m., they took a dinghy to return to the boat. At that time, the territory was under a curfew due to the pandemic, which reinforced the certainty that they had returned early. Bain declared later that Sarm had gone to sleep shortly after arriving on board, and later, around 2:30 a.m., he woke up noticing Heslop was gone. He got up to look for her on the boat and in the vicinity of the sea before returning to the dinghy and heading to shore to notify the local police. That first contact occurred around 2:44 a.m. on March 8. However, there was an omission that turned out to be fundamental. The Coast Guard was not notified until 11:45 a.m., 9 hours later. This delay set off alarms among family members, authorities, and maritime rescue experts. A Coast Guard commander even stated that in situations of disappearance at sea, every minute is crucial, and that the delay drastically reduced the chances of finding Heslop alive. He also stressed that it was rare for a person who falls into the water to never be recovered, which made the absence of a body even stranger. The local police conducted an initial search of the vessel, but when they requested a full forensic inspection, Ryan Bain refused under the advice of his lawyer, a decision that fueled suspicions. Due to this, the Siren Song was searched in a superficial manner, but no exhaustive expert analysis was ever carried out that could confirm or rule out the possibility of a crime on board. In the following days, drones, tracking dogs, and divers were deployed to inspect the coast and the nearby sea, but there were no results. On the other hand, Sarm's personal belongings, including her passport, phone, and wallet, remained on the vessel, which made it unlikely that she had decided to leave of her own volition. 9 days later, a resident of the island reported having heard a scream coming from the sea the night the woman disappeared, in the direction of where the catamaran was anchored. Although this testimony was incorporated into the investigation, it could never be confirmed or directly linked to the case. 2 weeks later, the FBI joined the search, but they also did not achieve any significant progress. Sarm's family then began a struggle that continues to this day. Her parents and friends have insisted that she was a responsible, organized person with nautical experience, someone who had crossed the Atlantic by boat without any incident. Everyone agreed that it was not logical for her to get up in the middle of the night to swim, as Bain's version suggested. The lack of answers pushed them to question every detail, from the timeline of the night to the evidence that was never collected, and the passing of months only brought more doubts. In November 2021, barely 8 months after the disappearance, the Siren Song appeared for sale for more than $200,000. The name of the yacht had been erased and subsequently changed to Orion's Belt, Sarm's family and friends demanded that a full forensic examination be carried out before any transaction, but this never happened. The fact that the vessel was attempted to be sold without having been investigated in depth was perceived as an attempt to erase any possible trace. In parallel, details of Ryan's past began to come to light. His ex-wife publicly stated that she had suffered abuse during their marriage, and that on one occasion, she even feared for her life. Bain had already been convicted of domestic violence years prior. Although he served barely a month in jail, his lawyer maintained that there was no evidence that he had had a violent altercation with Sarm, but the precedent contributed to reinforcing suspicions against him, which increased when in 2022 a further controversy arose. The family reported that the authorities had shown them CCTV footage of the couple leaving the restaurant that night. But this video did not match the description of the clothing it was said Sarm was wearing. Furthermore, the authorities stopped the playback of the recording before it finished, refusing to share it under the argument that it could affect a potential future trial. As if this were not enough, the garment she was wearing in the footage was never returned to the family, along with the other belongings collected on the boat. In 2024 and 2025, the British press and the BBC revisited this case in documentaries and special reports. Unpublished images of the couple walking along the pier before boarding the dinghy were disseminated, which is now considered the last recording of Sarm alive. And so, more than 4 years after her disappearance, there is still no trace of the body, nor evidence to confirm what happened that night on the Siren Song. Heslop's mother has publicly stated that she accepts that her daughter is no longer alive, although the most painful thing is not knowing how she died or where she is, and the only thing she has asked for is to be able to say goodbye to her and thus give her a resting place. This case remains open and unresolved, marked by inconsistencies, silences, and omissions that to this day prevent us from knowing the complete truth. Although the most disturbing thing is that with each passing year, the possibility of obtaining answers seems to fade, as if the ocean had swallowed not only a woman, but also the opportunity to discover what really happened to her. The aliens of the Amazon. In July 2023, the Peruvian Amazon jungle became the scene of a story that seemed to come out of science fiction. In the Iquitu indigenous community, located in the Alto Nanay district, Maynas province, the residents began to report the presence of strange beings that prowled at night, stalking from the darkness. The testimonies agreed that the intruders were nearly 2 meters tall. They moved as if they were floating a meter above the ground and were covered by a kind of metallic or silver suit. Some described them as immune to firearms, capable of resisting the hunter's shots without suffering any harm at all. Others ensured they disappeared suddenly, as if they faded into thin air when they were cornered. The most repeated description spoke of round shoes that emitted a red light at the heel, elongated heads, and masks that hid their faces with yellowish eyes that seemed to illuminate the darkness. Fear quickly took hold of the community. The Iquitu, accustomed to living in a hostile environment of wild nature, began to feel that they were facing something much more dangerous. Everything reached a desperate point when a teenager was injured with cuts on her neck after a presumed attack, which confirmed to them that what was happening was not a product of rumors or collective hallucinations. The girl was treated at the local medical post while the leaders demanded the presence of the army from the authorities to protect the population. The communal leader, Jairo Riategui Avila, recounted in detail the encounter he had with one of the alleged attackers. He assured that he fired on 2 occasions without managing to knock him down. "They seem armored like a green goblin suit," he said. According to his testimony, the figure rose into the air and was lost in the darkness. Since then, the Iquitu began to organize night rounds to patrol the area, determined to defend their families from visitors they themselves baptized as extraterrestrials. The echo of these reports did not take long to reach the national media. Headlines speaking of aliens in the Amazon spread throughout the country, reinforcing the perception that something inexplicable was happening in the depths of the jungle. Meanwhile, other residents remembered ancient legends of the so-called pelicaras, face peelers, feared characters in Amazonian folklore linked to organ trafficking who supposedly roamed communities to kidnap people. Soon, the confusion between myths, fear, and contemporary testimonies fueled a climate of collective hysteria. The pressure forced the National Police of Peru and the Navy to send agents to the area. The official investigation soon revealed a different version of events. The public ministry, through the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for Environmental Matters of Loreto, reported that these were not beings from another world, but rather foreign mafias dedicated to illegal mining. Groups composed of Brazilians and Colombians were allegedly operating clandestine dredges in the Nanay River Basin, where around 80% of illegal gold extraction activities are concentrated. Prosecutor Carlos Castro Quintanilla pointed out that there was a very high probability that those responsible for the appearances were precisely these illegal miners, who had resorted to costumes and technological equipment to frighten the indigenous people and force them to abandon their territories. It was even suggested that they could have used drones modified with lights and metallic covers capable of simulating humanoid figures in the middle of the night. The official explanation brought some calm, but it also left a bitter taste. The community members felt that their testimonies were being ignored, while the authorities stressed that there was no evidence of extraterrestrial life involved. At the same time, the possibility that armed criminal organizations were behind the attacks and were willing to hurt those who defended their lands was equally terrifying. The mystery, however, did not end there. While the prosecutor's office spoke of illegal mining, ufologists like Anthony Choi claimed to have received multiple reports of similar phenomena in other regions of the Amazon. According to his investigations, recent cases in towns like Massacia and Contamana described attacks of lights that seemed like laser beams descending from the sky and attempting to take away teenagers. In total, they counted 5 or 6 episodes in a period of a month and a half. For Choi, the coincidence of testimonies in different parts of the jungle could not be ignored, although he acknowledged that many communities could be mixing their fears with legends like that of the Pelacaras or Pistacos. He also warned that the magnitude of the phenomenon suggested something more complex. Meanwhile, the Akitu continued living in fear. The night rounds were maintained for weeks, and although the military presence reduced the incidents, the sense of vulnerability did not disappear. The stories of beings that float, that are immune to weapons, and that stalk in silence every night remained marked in the memory of the community. Today, more than a year after the start of those events, there is no definitive resolution. The official version maintains that everything was the product of mining mafias with enough technological resources to intimidate the residents, a hypothesis that fits with the violence and pressure that these organizations exert in the region. However, that explanation has never been fully confirmed. The testimonies of the community members, the alleged attacks, and the descriptions of impossible figures still do not fully fit, leaving open a mystery that still envelops the Amazon jungle. The disappearance of Daniel Robinson. On the 23rd of June 2021, in the intense heat of the Arizona desert, Daniel Robinson, a 24-year-old geologist, was last seen leaving a worksite in the Buckeye area. That morning, he had been conducting studies in a well when he drove off in his blue Jeep Renegade toward the west, and after that, no one saw him again. Daniel was a young man with a promising future. He was born without the lower part of his right arm, but he never allowed that to stop him. He practiced sports, traveled, studied geology at the College of Charleston, and after graduating, he moved to Arizona, where he landed a job as a hydrogeologist. His life revolved around exploring the terrain and natural resources, which made it even stranger that he would disappear in an environment he knew so well. That morning in June, a coworker stated that Daniel was behaving strangely, although he could never specify how. After saying goodbye, he saw him drive into the desert, and at nightfall, when no one had heard from him, his father, David Robinson, was notified, and he immediately began the search. Almost a month later, on July 19, a rancher found Daniel's Jeep at the bottom of a ravine less than 5 kilometers from where he was last seen. The vehicle was overturned on its side with the airbags deployed and tracks that indicated someone had attempted to start it more than 40 times after the impact. Near the car were his belongings, clothes, wallet, keys, and even his cell phone. Everything was there, except for Daniel. The Buckeye police assured that it was an accident. Robinson had allegedly lost control of his Jeep and overturned it in the ravine, probably getting out disoriented and walking until he was lost in the desert. However, these official conclusions did not convince his family. David Robinson hired a private investigator, Jeff McGrath, who specialized in accident reconstruction. After analyzing the data, McGrath asserted that there were notable inconsistencies. According to the Jeep's computer records, the crash occurred around 1:00 p.m., that is, 4 hours after Daniel was last seen. He also pointed to the existence of 11 additional miles recorded on the odometer after the accident, and remains of red paint that suggested a possible collision with another vehicle. To him, all of this indicated that the scene had been manipulated. The rancher who found the car also fueled the doubts. He ensured that 2 days earlier he had traveled the same place looking for his cattle, and that the Jeep was not there. That would imply that the vehicle had been placed in the ravine at some time later, reinforcing the theory that the accident could have been staged. The official search efforts included helicopters, drones, tracking dogs, and dozens of agents covering more than 70 square miles of desert. However, they did not find any trace. The only things that appeared were human remains on different occasions, but DNA tests confirmed that none of them belonged to Daniel. The police investigation also revealed more personal aspects of his life. It was known that he had met a woman a few months earlier during an Instacart delivery, with whom he began talking, and whom he visited on several occasions. She declared that she felt uncomfortable with his persistence and stopped answering him, which led the police to consider the hypothesis that Daniel was going through a fragile emotional state. Some officers even insinuated that he could have left voluntarily. However, his family, friends, and co-workers rejected this possibility. They asserted that he did not show signs of depression or desires to disappear, much less to end his life. As months passed, tensions between the Robinson family and the Buckeye Police Department grew stronger. David accused the authorities of having acted with negligence, of not having carried out an adequate expert analysis of the Jeep, and of having been too quick to rule out the possibility of a crime. His suspicions increased when someone broke into his son's apartment in Tempe, going through his computer and disarraying his clothes. This happened just before the police obtained the warrant to inspect it formally. In 2023, the police department itself published a report online detailing its version of events. According to this reconstruction, the Jeep had suffered a real accident, and the irregularities in the mileage and the subsequent attempts to start the car could be explained by technical failures or attempts to start the car after the accident. The official stance is clear. There is no conclusive evidence that Daniel was the victim of a crime. For them, it is most likely that he got lost in the desert after the accident, but time has not erased the doubts. For this year, 2025, 4 years after the disappearance, the case remains open and without answers. David Robinson continues to organize searches on his own, supported by volunteers and families of other missing persons. He has turned the fight to find his son into a personal mission, keeping interest alive in the media, social networks, and missing persons forums. He has even said that the skills he acquired as a military man in Afghanistan are now applied in the tireless search for his own son. The only thing certain is that Daniel's body has never been found, nor has the desert returned his remains, nor have the authorities been able to prove what happened that morning. Among the theories that circulate is that of a real accident, that of a possible attack or an intentional collision, and even that he was the victim of a crime linked to hidden interests in the area, but none has been confirmed. The disappearance of Daniel Robinson is one of the most disturbing cases of the recent decade in the United States, not only because of the unknowns that surround the finding of his vehicle, but because it reflects the fragility of the official investigation and the helplessness of a family that, despite everything, refuses to give up. His father sums this up with a rather powerful image. "I will never leave a comrade behind on the battlefield, and I will not leave my son behind either." The visitors of Las Vegas. On the night of the 30th of April 2023, the Nevada sky was illuminated with a green light that descended in a dive toward the horizon. It was seen in 4 different states and captured by the body cameras of several Las Vegas police officers. Minutes later, a 911 call would ignite one of the most viral and disturbing cases of the decade. A 16-year-old Angel Kenmore claimed to have seen in the backyard of his house 2 creatures between 2 and 3 meters tall, of a thin, elongated appearance, and with a grayish-green tone to their skin. According to his account, one of those beings was hiding behind a forklift while breathing heavily, and another seemed to be watching from the fence. Prey to panic, he called his father and brother, who claimed to have witnessed the same thing. The fear was such that Angel ended up dialing the emergency number and describing what he was seeing as non-human people. The police arrived immediately, and in their own recordings, the officers can be heard commenting on how unusual the flash they had observed minutes earlier was. They tried to question the witnesses and neighbors who were driving by, asking them if they had seen anything strange in the sky. The family, in a state of shock, related that in front of them had been a 3-meter-tall being. Shortly after, the video uploaded by Angel to YouTube reached more than 1 million views. Although the images do not show with clarity what he describes, the story spread immediately. Strange people began jumping fences to try to see the backyard where the visitors had supposedly manifested. Even according to the family, days later, 3 men dressed in black appeared on their street aboard an official vehicle, who fled without giving explanations when they were confronted. As the case became viral, conflicting interpretations arose. Forensic analyst Scott Roeder, known for his work in high-profile trials, examined the video frame by frame and stated that at least 2 figures were visible. According to him, the shadows and anomalies detected could not be explained as camera glitches, but as proof that the beings were using some kind of camouflage device. At his side, journalist Jim Quirk raised the idea that the green light observed minutes earlier could correspond to a ship that performed an emergency landing in the neighborhood. The hypothesis was received with enthusiasm by some ufologists and with rejection by skeptics. The popularizer Mick West suggested that what was seen that night could have been a raccoon, a coyote, or some other animal confused in the twilight. Other critics ensured that everything boiled down to spots on the lens or effects of digital compression. The Las Vegas police investigated, interviewed the family, and collected videos, but could not establish a definitive conclusion. Neither were there any remains, footprints, or physical evidence that confirmed the presence of anything out of the ordinary. The only verifiable thing is that at the same time as the incident, dozens of witnesses in several states reported the fall of a luminous bolide toward the ground to the American Meteor Society. Today, more than a year later, the case continues to divide opinions. For some, it was a simple confusion, magnified by the virality of the internet. For others, the coincidence between the flash, the testimonies, and the recordings points to something much stranger. The official record only concludes that there was a sighting of a light in the sky, and that the Kenmore family believed they saw creatures in their backyard. And yet, what makes this episode so disturbing is not what the camera showed, but the persistent sensation that something was there hidden in the darkness, watching from a distance. The Yemen orb. Without a doubt, this is the most recent mystery, and therefore the one most likely to be explained or resolved in the coming days or months. But it is also one of the most disturbing related to the UFO phenomenon in recent years. What began as a rumor leaked from military circles ended up becoming public evidence during a United States Congress hearing in September of this year, 2025, when an unpublished video left legislators, experts, and viewers around the world perplexed. The images captured by an MQ-9 Reaper military drone on the 30th of October 2024, off the coast of Yemen, showed a metallic, spherical, and shiny object moving at high speed over the sea. In the recording, the moment another drone fires a Hellfire missile is observed, a high-precision projectile designed to destroy tanks and fortifications. But what happened next baffled everyone. The missile impacted the object and did not cause it any damage. This orb continued its trajectory as if nothing had happened, while the remains of the projectile seemed to be absorbed by the sphere. The person in charge of showing the material was Congressman Eric Burleson, who claimed to have received the video directly from an anonymous whistleblower. During the hearing, Burleson commented that he was not going to give prior explanations, because the content spoke for itself. As the images were projected, the room remained silent until journalist George Knapp, one of the greatest researchers of the phenomenon in the United States, exclaimed that what everyone had seen was literally a Hellfire missile bouncing off a UFO. The political and media impact was immediate. Hellfire missiles are among the most feared weapons in the American arsenal, and their effectiveness in combat has been documented for decades. That one of these would result in harmlessness against an unknown object not only fueled the idea that the military was facing something beyond its comprehension, but it also posed a scenario of military vulnerability in the middle of a conflict zone. In those same waters, Houthi rebel drones and missiles represent a constant danger to commercial navigation, so the presence of an inexplicable object in the middle of that context could not be overlooked. The congressman reacted with surprise. Burleson insisted that the citizenry had the right to know these images, while Representative Jasmine Crockett underscored the importance of protecting the whistleblowers who delivered this type of evidence. For her part, Ana Paulina Luna, chair of a new subcommittee focused on the declassification of federal secrets, called for greater transparency and warned that the American people deserved to know why their most advanced weapons seemed incapable of damaging that object. Knapp added another disturbing nuance. According to his words, there are servers filled with similar videos that neither Congress nor the public has been able to see. For him, the recording shown was barely the tip of the iceberg of a much broader phenomenon that remains classified. The reaction of the Department of Defense did not help to calm the speculation. A Pentagon spokesperson declared that they had no comments on the video, while the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, limited itself to confirming that the investigation remained open. This official silence reinforced the perception that something very important was being hidden. For their part, the scientific and technological community also spoke out. Ballistics analysts recalled that a Hellfire missile is capable of penetrating steel armor and turning combat vehicles into scrap. The fact that a projectile of those characteristics seemed to bounce off an object with no aerodynamic shape, no visible propulsion, and apparently small, was inexplicable under the known laws of physics. For some, it could be a glitch in the interpretation of the images, but for others, it was evidence that the drones captured a real and unknown phenomenon. The case was even immediately compared to the famous Go Fast video of 2015, in which an object seemed to move at high speed over the sea off California. At that time, AARO analysts concluded that it was a weather balloon and that the illusion of speed had been a product of the viewing angle. However, the case of the Yemen orb presented a fundamental difference. Here it was not an optical illusion, but a direct confrontation with military weaponry. The international press described the incident as one of the most disturbing episodes in recent history, with unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs. Various media agreed that the images could not be dismissed as a simple montage, since they came from military sensors and were presented in an official forum under oath. Since their release to the public, independent analyses of this video have emerged. Forensic scene reconstruction expert Scott Roeder, who has testified in high-profile trials, affirmed that the recording was authentic and that what was shown could not be explained with known techniques. According to him, the orb seemed to deploy some kind of defensive or camouflage mechanism that neutralized the missile. Other researchers maintained that if its authenticity were confirmed, we would be facing the first evidence of an object that not only evades human weaponry but resists it directly. The U.S. Congress, pressured by public opinion, announced that more hearings would be held and that classified files would be reviewed. However, to date, no official explanation has been given. Today, the so-called Yemen orb is considered one of the strongest cases within the contemporary catalog of unidentified aerial phenomena. It is unknown if that object represents a real threat, if it was a technological prototype of some foreign power, or if, as many speculate, it is something that goes beyond our understanding. The only certainty is that a Hellfire missile designed to destroy any target on Earth bounced off an object that continued its path without being altered. And no one so far has been able to explain how that is possible. The Havana Syndrome. Although this mystery began in the previous decade, we decided to include it because throughout the 2020s it remained very active and new evidence was produced. Beyond being confirmed as something real with an intentional origin, it would be one of the most disturbing mysteries of our times. At the end of 2016, U.S. and Canadian diplomats and agents stationed in Havana began to fall ill suddenly. In homes and hotel rooms, they heard directed chirping, a sensation of pressure in the skull, buzzing, vertigo, nausea, confusion, balance problems, and vision issues. Some reported lasting sequelae and tinnitus that required hearing aids. As months passed, similar reports emerged in Guangzhou and Shanghai, in Vienna, Berlin, Tbilisi, Warsaw, London, Belgrade, and even in Washington, D.C., very close to the White House. The State Department cut staff in Cuba, medical checkups and diplomatic protests multiplied, and the press baptized the phenomenon as Havana Syndrome. The search for a cause opened a range of hypotheses. In 2020, a panel of the U.S. National Academies of Sciences concluded that directed pulsed radiofrequency energy seemed the most plausible mechanism to explain a subset of cases without being able to affirm it conclusively. The idea fit with the so-called Frey effect, described since the Cold War, by which pulsed microwaves can be perceived as sounds inside the head. The ultrasound hypothesis by intermodulation of surveillance equipment also circulated, as did exposure to neurotoxic pesticides used in campaigns against Zika, and in certain episodes, environmental explanations as prosaic as crickets, whose acoustic pattern matched disseminated recordings. Another line proposed psychogenic components in contexts of extreme stress. The result was a fragmented map, partial explanations that fit here and there without closing the entire puzzle. During the 2020s, science, intelligence, and journalism walked at different paces. In 2024, the U.S. National Institutes of Health published 2 studies in JAMA, one of the most important medical journals in the world. 86 affected people, and a control group formed by individuals with similar work characteristics, participated in that research to be able to make fair comparisons. In neuropsychological tests, neuronal lesion biomarkers, and advanced MRI scans, they found no objective differences consistent at the group level. They did detect worse mood, post-traumatic symptoms, and lower life satisfaction among the cases. The message was uncomfortable and clear at the same time. People are suffering, but markers of brain damage do not confirm a detectable lesion in the aggregate. That finding strengthened those who favor non-weaponized causes, without ruling out that a subset of incidents obeys something else. At the same time, a series of journalistic investigations insisted on the opposite path. 60 Minutes, in collaboration with The Insider and Der Spiegel, reconstructed a possible chain of episodes that would connect some cases with the Russian Unit 29155, known for sabotage and poisoning operations, mentioning documents on non-lethal acoustic weapons, locations, and the presence of Agent Albert Averyanov in Tbilisi during attacks reported against U.S. personnel. Interviewees like Lieutenant Colonel Greg Edgen, former head of the Pentagon unit that investigated these incidents, claimed to be convinced that Russia was behind at least part of the cases, with directed energy technology tested for years. Historical precedents provide a disturbing context. Since the 1950s, the U.S. Embassy in Moscow was irradiated with low-intensity microwaves, an incident known as the Moscow Signal, which generated formal protests and in situ measurements and left open questions about health effects. The most recent official evaluations reflect the tension between lines of evidence. In 2023, an interagency review concluded that it was very unlikely that a foreign adversary was responsible for the majority of the cases, without ruling out a small subset. In January 2025, a declassified summary refined that nuance. Most agencies maintained the very unlikely for a sustained foreign campaign. But 2 agencies, among them, according to reports, the NSA, estimated with low confidence that there is an even probability that a small number of incidents could have been caused by a novel weapon in the hands of a state actor. That same evaluation emphasized that having the capacity does not equate to proving its use against U.S. personnel. The White House highlighted that scientific research into the potential effects of radio frequency and acoustic energy remains ongoing, and that those affected must receive support and compensation. At the same time, some academics have offered less extraordinary explanations. Engineers like Kevin Fu, who in 2018 studied the impact of ultrasound, pointed out that the song of a tropical cricket could explain several of the disseminated recordings and also have contributed to stress and sleep deprivation problems that worsen neurological symptoms. The Jason Group, an advisor to the government, also found strong similarities between sounds recorded in Cuba and insect songs. These interpretations do not deny the suffering of those affected, but suggest that in many cases the causes would be environmental rather than the result of a weapon. However, the testimonies present aspects difficult to fit into that hypothesis. Entire families sick at the same time, children with balance problems and bleeding, repeated episodes after moving dwellings on the same night, and even officials who described sensory shocks at close range to the White House. For them, explanations based on stress or insects are insufficient. Doctors, for their part, have not found clear evidence of brain damage caused by an external agent. And analysts point out that there is also no solid evidence that incriminates another country, although they do not completely rule out a reduced number of cases linked to directed energy. The situation remains this way: a syndrome that the administration recognizes under the name of anomalous health incidents, with hundreds of reports since 2016, few serious and persistent cases, and without a definitive explanation after nearly 10 years of study. In many episodes, environmental or psychological hypotheses seem sufficient. In others, the suspicion of an attack with advanced technology persists. The only clear thing is that the mystery remains open. If it were confirmed that some cases are due to directed energy, the protection of diplomats and intelligence should be rethought. If, on the other hand, it were shown that everything responds to common factors aggravated by stress, it would be necessary to revise health and prevention protocols. For now, the so-called Havana syndrome remains an enigma, a phenomenon where scientific data that does not show clear damage, forceful testimonies, and divided official evaluations coexist. A case that, precisely because it lacks a single narrative, results in being so strange and disturbing.